just to summarise, you're not really holding out hope that environment laws passed with the blessing of Matt Canavan are going to really fix the problem. Is that a good summary?
If Matt Canavan thinks they're good laws, I reckon the koalas should be nervous.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, I'm Ebony Bennett and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. After an historic defeat of the Coalition at May's federal election, Labor won more than just government. With an outright majority in the lower house and a Labor Greens majority in the Senate, it won the chance to pass big progressive reforms. On climate and the environment, it really shouldn't matter if the Coalition keeps its net zero policy or not, for example. The government can really crack on without them. But that's not what's actually happening.
You're trying to negotiate new environmental laws. Can you actually get a deal done in the next 18 months that really does please everyone?
We certainly will be seeking the support from both the Coalition and the Greens to deliver these reforms.
The ABC has been told that there is optimism that a deal can finally be reached here with the Coalition, the preferred partner to see these laws passed through.
Well, I wouldn't say we're close to locking in any deals prematurely, Sally, but I did have my third meeting with the Minister late last week and it was a productive meeting.
The government is unlikely to support a demand from the Greens for a climate trigger to be embedded within these laws, and that could see polluting projects blocked if that were to be put in place.
Last year, then Environment Minister Tony Plibersek actually reached an agreement with both the Greens and Independent Senator David Pocock to pass new nature-positive legislation. But the deal was scuppered by the Prime Minister, apparently after lobbying from Western Australian Premier Roger Cook. And just last week, it was reported that Plibersek's successor, Murray Watt, is close to reaching an agreement with the Coalition to reform Australia's environment laws. Joining me today to discuss what the hell is going on with Australia's environment laws is Australia Institute co-CEO Leanne Minshull. G'day, Leanne.
Hi, Ebony.
I think we should probably start off with the idea that actually everyone kind of is in agreement that Australia's environment laws are broken. Why is it important that these environment laws are reformed?
Yes, everyone is in agreement, but I think that's where the agreement stops. So if we go back really quickly to 1999 when John Howard was in government and the Environment Minister then was Robert Hill. He was a really good Environment Minister, probably the last really good Environment Minister the Liberal Party had. They created the Environmental Biodiversity and Protection Conservation Act. Thank you. You say EPBC so often you forget what it actually stands for. And it was to ensure that we took care of our environment on matters of nationally significant environmental matters. They came up with 9 matters. They left out climate. But at that time, I mean, we knew that the climate change was going to be a problem, but it wasn't listed as one of the 9 matters to look at. And it was thought that this would be a way that if we had good environmental standards, good oversight of national environmental systems, because let's face it, biodiversity doesn't respect state borders. We live in ecosystems, not states, when you're thinking of the natural world. Then this is really, to do this, we would be able to protect our nature going ahead. This failed, absolutely.
To put it bluntly.
To put it bluntly, it failed completely. So I actually just had a look a minute ago to see how much of our forest cover we've lost in the past 25 years, and by all impacts. So this isn't just logging, this is logging, fires, but of course fires are increasing because of climate change. And have a guess how much we've lost.
Oh, I don't even want to hazard it. It'll be too depressing.
Well, it's about the size of half of Victoria.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you imagine that Victoria was completely forested, and if you just wiped out half of it, that's what we've lost in treetop cover in the past 25 years. And we're winning at a couple of things that we don't want to win at. We're winning at extinctions of species. We're winning at species extinction. We're winning at actual native mammal extinction. We're a global hotspot for deforestation. We're also a global hotspot for warming oceans. So on all types of data points that you want to look at, all sorts of criteria, these laws have been an abysmal failure.
Yeah.
And so then we had the Samuels Review, and the Samuels Review, everybody sort of said, yep, that makes a lot of sense. Let's get stuck in and reform the environment laws. And it's kind of stalled there because it's gone from looking at from a holistic perspective of what do we need to do, and like protecting the environment is protecting us. We are the environment. And it's gone from that down to a very narrow set of retail politics, which is really disappointing.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that we need new national environmental laws, but we also need a new independent watchdog who can enforce those laws. In a few weeks, we'll introduce legislation to the Parliament to create Australia's first ever National Environmental Protection Agency.
And Jabel, you want the final say on projects to rest with the Minister rather than the Environment Protection Agency.
The Prime Minister has promised an EPA. We know that. He wants an EPA. We don't want an EPA because it's, of course, would be the 8th in the country. So more red tape means longer approval processes.
Will there be a climate trigger in this legislation as presented to the Parliament?
I would say it is unlikely.
What exactly is on the table when we're talking about Murray Watt's current kind of negotiations with the coalition?
Yeah, well, wouldn't that be nice to know, Ebony? Unfortunately, we don't really know. The minister has said that he's consulted widely, but he's been very particular in even the environment groups that he's had consultations with. A lot of people haven't had time to look at what the minister's putting forward, what the details of that are. We know that we need better national environmental standards. We know that they want an EPA that's independent and that can be the tough cop on the beat. But what are those national environmental standards? We know that he wants to leave a climate trigger out, but what are the areas that he actually wants to cover? And I think leaving the climate trigger out is very telling in what the government doesn't want to tackle. And I would suggest that leaving a climate trigger out means that they don't want to have things, high-emitting projects like new coal mines or new gas, to be captured under the EPBC.
Yeah, and I want to stick with that for a little bit because it's been one of the key things that I guess the environment movement has been seeking for a long time.
Yeah.
Along with fixing things like the exemption for logging that happens under regional forest agreements. I mean, climate change just is one of the biggest issues facing the environment.
Yeah.
How much sense does it make that we would reform these laws and again leave out climate change?
I know. Can I just go back a step to let people know who are listening, because there's actually only a few people know what is covered currently underneath So the EPBC has 9 issues that they will cover. And if your proposed development is going to disrupt one of those things, so it's things like wetlands, the Great Barrier Reef, oceans, Commonwealth oceans, then your project has to go through the EPBC process. Now, at the moment, because we don't have a climate trigger, if a climate trigger was in there, if your new project was going to be a high-emitting project, then it would be called into the EPBC process.
Climate is obviously this huge part and it's not really adequately being addressed, I guess, under the current EPBC laws.
Yeah.
What is the impact of that at the moment?
All right, I'll tell you an interesting little data point. Because we don't capture high-emitting projects under the EPBC Act, so we don't have to assess high-emitting projects. So if you just go back and think about the 9 things that will trigger an assessment to be required, it just means that we actually have more renewable energy projects being assessed under the EPBC Act than we do coal mines or gas fields.
So at the moment, it captures more renewable projects than fossil fuel projects.
Correct.
For their impact on the
environment.
For
their impact on the environment. That's right.
Okay. So it's arse-backwards.
It is arse-backwards. That's it's arse-backwards. There's no other way to say it. Another interesting thing is that, and this is the thing that's so frustrating about the politics of, and also to me, shows the power of the fossil fuel lobby, because people have been trying to get a climate trigger or, have emissions assessed under our environmental legislation since 2000. So Robert Hill originally had what we would now refer to as a climate trigger.
Yep.
In 2000, I think it was 2005, the then opposition Environment Minister Anthony Albanese tried to introduce an act to Parliament which is the equivalent of now a climate trigger.
The honourable member for Grayndler.
It's timely that today, Valentine's Day, I introduce the Avoiding Dangerous Climate Change Bill, because as important as human relationships are, so too is our collective relationship with our natural environment. If the Avoiding Dangerous Climate Change Bill is passed, the Australian Government will be required to ratify the Kyoto Protocol and become part of the international solution to climate change.
And then, of course, in 2020, the Greens wanted to as well. So this is something that when anybody doesn't hold the levers of power, so are not influenced by the fossil fuel industry, see this as essential to any good environment legislation. And I think one thing we have to mention here is that under the Samuels review, he actually didn't think that a climate trigger should be put in the EPBC because he felt there were other mechanisms and other laws that could deal with emissions reduction targets and the impact. I would disagree. I think what that brings up for me is the problem with having climate and nature dealt with as separate things.
Yeah.
They are they are synergistic.
They're inextricably linked.
They are inextricably linked. You can't pull them apart. And we all kind of know that emissions are rising anyway. So we're not doing a good job in either portfolio. And having the climate change minister responsible for some things and having the environment minister responsible for others, I just think it's a recipe for disaster.
The changes remove the ability to revoke approvals in certain circumstances.
That will be one of the most egregious acts of environmental vandalism this Parliament has ever been responsible for.
This is not about activists versus fish farmers. This is about our democracy.
The scope of these laws is far, far broader than just limited to salmon farming or just limited to Macquarie Harbour. As long as the criteria are met, any and all projects fall within the scope of these laws.
It is not an unintended consequence of an Environmental Protection Act that sometimes we might protect the environment.
So the previous Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek, had all but secured a deal with the crossbench, with the Greens specifically, only to have it scrapped by the Prime Minister. Now they're negotiating with the coalition. I mean, what does that tell us overall about the government's priorities?
Well, I think there's two things to note there. One is that we all saw the Prime Minister gut the current environment laws last year just before the election. Sorry, yeah, this year. God, was it? Sorry, and that was clearly done because the current Environmental Protection Act was, there was a threat that it might actually be used and work to save a World Heritage Area and an endangered little skate in Tasmania. So what does that tell us? It tells us that when it comes to a crunch point, if you've got to protect the environment or the interests from the extractive industries, this government, our Prime Minister, will line up with the extractive industries at the expense of the environment. I don't think we could get it any clearer than that. So if you fast forward to how they're negotiating now, I think the worrying thing for me is that Minister Watt always presents himself or, has created this myth about himself that the media also repeats that he is Mr. Fix-It. But the question is, what is he going to fix? Is he going to fix retail politics? No one will remember him and the environment will suffer. Or will he actually try and fix the environment? The environment will be happy and people will probably remember Murray Watt outside of just this term. Going to deal with the coalition makes me think he's going to take the former rather than the latter. He's going to take the very small, narrow, let's fix it now view. Why do I think that? Well, if you look at the LNP, they're not champions for the environment. They're certainly not champions on climate change. And you've got Andrew Hastie and Matt Canavan, at least, arguing that we shouldn't even have a net zero target, like we shouldn't have a net zero policy. So why would you choose to negotiate with a party that has that type of thinking around the environment when it's completely open to you to negotiate with the Greens, who have a good record on coming up with good policy to secure our environment?
Yeah.
So even if we want to have the minister to look forward in retail politics terms just to the next election, if he goes down the route of sacrificing the environment for short-term retail politics and does a bad deal with the LNP, I think it's really going to bite him in the arse at the next election because people want this fixed. It's why we elected a centre-left government. It's why we have a crossbench full of Greens and climate-friendly independents. So
because that's what Australians have voted in for
Australia,
2 elections.
Exactly. So they are going to have a reckoning with this in terms of politics, and no matter what happens with the politics, we're heading for a massive reckoning in terms of the environment that we live in. And it's not just, oh dear, we've lost the koalas. I mean, it's impossible to think that koalas are now a threatened species. It's insane.
Yeah.
But even if you're not interested in that, all of the work that the Australia Institute's done in the past couple of months, think about how the environment and climate change is affecting your insurance policies. You know, it's a great line, I think, from Richard, you know, don't believe in climate change, your insurer certainly does.
Yeah.
And that's not going to change. Doesn't matter what deal that they do with the coalition, that is not going to change.
Yeah. The actual ironclad impacts of climate are already here with us.
Exactly. Well, we've kind of already baked them in.
Yeah.
And we all saw the climate disaster risk report that was released just before the emissions reduction targets or the sliding scale or whatever they're referring to them as.
Compounding, cascading impacts of climate, I believe the risk assessment talked about.
And Ebony, that's if we stop doing things like expanding fossil fuels today. That is baked in.
Yeah. So basically, just to summarise, you're not really holding out hope that environment laws passed with the blessing of Matt Canavan are going to really fix the problem. Is that a good summary?
If Matt Canavan thinks they're good laws, I reckon the koalas should be nervous. But no, I don't hold out hope if that's the route they take. But I do hold out hope. Look, the cost for a deal is higher for the government than it was at the last election because this is more of an issue and they have to pass something. And they've already done the Greens over in a lot. I mean, if I was the Greens, I wouldn't be ready to rush out and make a new deal just to be walked halfway up the altar to be dumped.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't blame them for having some reticence just to believe that the government's going to make a deal with them. And then on the other side, as we've already talked about, they've got like Matt Canavan and Andrew Hastie. So I think it's going to be really hard for them. But I do still have hope, actually, that they may, just even because of politics and the inability to – can you imagine what the LNP might ask for in return for this? They know that the government wants to do a deal here.
Yeah.
What are they going to put on the table? They could ask for nuclear. They could ask for all manner of things that the government will find really hard and maybe things outside the environment portfolio. They're clever politicians. They mightn't have won many seats, but they know how to do a deal at the negotiating table. I'm really interested to see what they come up with to ask for in return. And if the price that they're demanding is too high, then I think that the government could do a deal with the Greens, and I hope that's how it rolls out.
So Australia has been very focused in recent years on diplomacy in the Pacific, pushing to host jointly a COP together with Pacific Island nations. And the Australia Institute has been doing a lot of work, you know, with civil society there in the Pacific as well. What do we know about how they're viewing, I guess, not so much Australia's environment laws, but the way that they're not stopping things like new gas and coal projects from going ahead every other week?
Well, they ask us almost weekly for the past 20 years, could you please stop expanding fossil fuel production? Don't have new gas fields. Don't have, new coal mines. And this is the absurdity of the debate around the EPBC Act. Like, where there's lots of people arguing over what percentage we should have in emissions reductions terms. I mean, it's important to set targets. I don't want to write that off completely. But, we've got to remember that the EPBC Act is basically a planning act. It's how you approve
big projects.
And they will be approved one way or the other. The tip is in the title. It's an approval process. So if we really wanted to take care of our Pacific neighbours, we would have taken action long ago. But, okay, we can't rewrite history. But the government doesn't need an EPBC Act to legislate for no new gas. It could implement a national legislation for stopping native forest logging. I mean, I know it'd be a bit hard, but they've done harder things before.
Yeah.
That's always...
Well, and lots of the states have already beat them to it.
Exactly. And think about what the states are doing on the emissions reduction targets, with the exception of Queensland, who's just thrown theirs out, and WA, who I don't think ever had them, but if they did, they definitely don't have them now. The states were going to do all of the work for the federal government. If, in fact, the states just did all of their emissions reduction targets program, it would have got us to 71%.
Yeah.
So, okay, Western Australia and Queensland have thrown a bit of a spanner in those works. But what we could do for our Pacific neighbours and for ourselves is just stop approving new fossil fuels, stop cutting down trees. It's really not complicated.
No, it's kind of like the basics.
It
really,
is the basics.
if you think about it that way.
Yeah. And think of all the kind of bad things that we could do if we just stopped doing the really bad things, because a lot of the heavy lifting to restore our natural environment and reduce emissions, if we're not going to do it by stopping logging companies cutting down native forests and stopping fossil fuel companies, most of them foreign-owned and not paying much tax, from expanding fossil fuels, then we are restricted in other ways, like what we do on our farms, like where we put our renewable energy projects, like where our housing developments goes. It's a bit galling to have arguments over a new housing development go in because of its effect on nature or its emissions. I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But a lot of the debate's concentrating on that and not looking at the coal expansion or the gas expansion.
Yeah. And, it's all out of proportion, the amount of attention that gets placed on those.
Yeah.
Compared to these big, massive polluting projects that just seem to skate through.
Well, it's good retail politics, isn't it, Ebony? Because we all want more houses to be built.
Yeah.
But it's easy for us all to get angry on building yet another gas field, most of which will be exported, hardly any money coming back to us.
Yeah. So I guess I just want to bring us back to what it is that we're trying to protect here and what everyone's interest is in, and that is the Australian environment. And because we're a giant island, it is unique. There's a lot of endemic species in Australia that are found absolutely nowhere else on Earth. And I think us and Indonesia, we've got the highest rates of endemic species that you can find nowhere else.
Yep.
So we really are a kind of a cradle of biodiversity.
That's why
here.
we're the highest at killing them. So I guess to be fair,
so many.
I guess to be fair, it's like, gee, you've got a lot of roadkill, yeah? Well, we got a lot of kangaroos, but we probably should stop killing them.
Yeah. But I mean, we do have a responsibility to protect Australia's unique environment, don't we?
Well, we've got to, I just think it's part of who we are and our national identity. I mean, yes, we do, is the short answer, Ebony. I just get a bit confounded in the end when we think about it's relatively easy to look after our environment, and by exploiting it and damaging it in the way that we are, we're getting relatively small returns for that destruction, and it's impacting on other sentient beings. Like, they're not just numbers. We're killing animals. We're losing our bush that we, very proudly like to get out into and have that as part of our identity as Australians. We do live in a unique place and we're smashing it.
Well, thanks, Leanne.
Thanks, Eb.
If you want to see the Australia Institute's research on the EPBC and protecting the skate and other endangered species, you can head on over to australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 14th of October, and our theme music is by Jonathan McPeat from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.